Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining our Stand By What You Sell webinar for the Northern Territory. I just want to make sure that you are all in the right webinar. This is a specific webinar for Northern Territory producers. So if you are from another state, it would be great if you could scan this QR code and check the dates and register for the correct webinar for your state, as this one will contain specific information for Northern Territory. And we've got Renae McLean from the Northern Territory Government who's going to be speaking in a little while as well. So it is quite specific. The New South Wales and Victorian webinars have already been held, and the footage, the films of those webinars is on our YouTube channel, on Integrity Systems YouTube. So you could catch them up there if this one's not for you. But yeah, just wanted to make sure you're all in the right place. But thanks for joining us. I'll just give you a bit of an introduction. My name's Cherie Young. I'm the Communications Manager at Integrity Systems Company. I'll be your facilitator for this webinar tonight. Just before we get going, just a bit of a rundown on what we're going to cover. We've got Elizabeth Bradley, who's the Compliance and Quality Policy Manager at Integrity Systems Company, who's going to present to you on LPA. So that's going to include some information about biosecurity and how to plan for that, and also NLIS and what's involved in that process as well. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on the eNVD and the new mobile app and where that's at the moment. And then Renae McLean, who's NT Government's Principal Livestock Biosecurity Officer, will join and give an update on sheep and goat eID for the Northern Territory, and also a bit of an update on NVDs and the NT Waybill and just how that all works together. So before I move on, just wanted to show you this quick slide just so you get a bit of an idea of where Integrity Systems Company fits into the red meat industry in Australia. So we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia. And together with MLA, we work to basically support and service the red meat industry. We have a couple of key programs that do that. Elizabeth is going to take you through the ins and outs of those in her presentation. So I shall pass over to Elizabeth to take you through that. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Lovely, thanks, Cherie, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. As Cherie mentioned, I'm going to run you through the LPA requirements as well as the National Livestock Identification or NLIS requirements and how they fit together to underpin the integrity in the red meat industry. I'm going to walk you through the LPA requirements in particular in relation to what you need to do in order to meet the LPA standards and how those standards correlate into the LPA NVDs in that program and how it fits together with the NLIS database as well. So first up, I just will give you an overview around the LPA program. So if you're LPA accredited, there's some key tips that you need to remember. So first of all is accreditation renews every 3 years. So we'll send you reminders to make sure that you stay up to date, but it's important you keep your accreditation up to date so you can keep access to the national vendor declarations and the eNVD system, just how you create them electronically as well. Other key things around the LPA accreditation is maintaining your on-farm records and practices in line with the LPA standards, and that helps you fill out those NVDs when you actually move livestock off your property. The third thing in the round LPA accreditation is that you can actually be selected for audit, which helps verify that the LPA program is actually working, which provides that assurance to our trading partners that we're doing everything that they require in order to continue to export livestock or our meat to those countries. So if you are selected for audit, you need to have those records on farm to back up all those declarations you're making on your NVDs as well. So it's really important that you understand your requirements and what you're actually signing up for when you complete your accreditation. So just to put into context for you as well, approximately 70% of the red meat Australia exports out of, or produces in Australia actually gets exported out of the country. And NLIS and LPA work together to sort of provide that assurance to our overseas trading partners who give us all their money for our delicious red meat so that we can continue to sell to them and continue our industry. So it's really important that we have these integrity systems in place and that everyone understands their requirements and that they're being met. So I'm going to run you through the LPA requirements tonight as well. So we can start off to help you understand and just give you a general reminder around those requirements. So in LPA, we have two key kind of elements. So one's the LPA rules, which sort of determines how you join the program and how you participate. The other one is what I'm going to run through in a little bit of detail now, which is around the requirements, which is contained in the LPA standards. So there's 7 different requirement kind of elements within the LPA standards. So they relate to property risks, so how risks on your property could potentially contaminate the meat that livestock produce. The next one is around treatment of animals. So when you're using animal veterinary products and chemicals on animals and how that relates into food safety. The third one is around the feed and the environment which the livestock that you have are in. So how chemical use on property or the feed that you're feeding them can relate into food safety of the meat. The third is preparing livestock for dispatch. So that's that fit to load kind of component. The next one is around livestock transactions and movements. So that's in and around completing your NVDs, and that brings in your NLIS requirements around identifying livestock and recording their movements in the NLIS database. I also just saw a note pop up just to give you a gentle reminder that we actually have the ability to do Q&A. So if you do have questions throughout the session, we've got some people standing by in the background from ISC and Renae from the Northern Territory Government to answer your questions. So there's a little box down the bottom to ask some questions. If you have any through the presentation as well, we'll answer them. The other requirements around LPA relate to biosecurity, which I'll talk about in relation to your on-farm management and biosecurity plans and animal welfare requirements in LPA as well. So to start off, we've got the first element is what we refer to it as in LPA, which is around property risk. And the property risk is all around looking at your property and determining anything that might cause a chemical or physical contamination to your livestock, which then might cause a food safety risk in the meat that they produce. So this generally refers to things like old dip sites or, you know, old machinery that's stored on your property or broken equipment and things that could actually injure the animals as well. So it's all around looking and identifying those issues and then putting in place, you know, practical measures to prevent them becoming contaminated. So it's about, you know, fencing off sites that might be contaminated, not allowing access for livestock to those contaminated areas, and having a system in place to identify any that are exposed, and making sure that they're identified appropriately on those outgoing NVDs. So it's all about linking that in. And the way you do that is ideally having a farm map where you can identify all those risk sources. So where your old dip sites are, potentially where any, you know, and contaminated rubbish sites or things like that are on your property. And then what you do to contain the livestock or stop them having access to those areas. The third thing is just around, you know, knowing which livestock might have been contaminated and making sure that you have a system to be able to record them on those outgoing NVDs, so that the person buying your livestock knows that those ones might need to be treated differently or looked at a little bit specially. So the next requirement in LPA, it speaks a lot to food safety, and this one's really important for our export markets. So it's around safe and responsible animal treatments. This all talks around administering veterinary drugs and treatments of that nature to livestock, because residues can get left if they're in a withholding period and they get processed. If that meat gets tested on the other side and it's over the limit for that country or even domestic consumption, it can actually cause a food safety risk because it can actually harm humans. So it's really important that this is done really well. So there's two angles to this. So one is we want to make sure that the animals are getting an effective dose of the treatment. So you're following the label instructions or your vet advice to make sure that the animal's taken care of and the treatment's either preventing a disease or it's treating it effectively. And the second part is also keeping really thorough records to make sure that you know when you're signing that NVD that they're either not in a withholding period or they've passed that withholding period, so that you can pass that information on to the person who's buying your livestock. So having really good records of your animal treatments and passing that information on through that NVD is really important so that that person who's buying your livestock can make informed decisions about it. It's really important for processors in particular, or potentially if you're doing live exports, so that they know vaccination statuses of some animals. So that's clearly communicated, so they can make, you know, the right export market decisions for that product or that animal. There's special considerations around the use of hormonal growth promotants as well, so keeping thorough records around buying, using and applying them. Triangular ear punch as well, if you're actually implanting hormonal growth promotants into cattle, is really important as well. Following your vet advice is critical in this area as well, and having good records to back up all of that label use. Also making sure that you're using, storing and disposing of chemicals properly, and making sure that any expired chemicals are disposed of and not used as well, because that might give an effective dose to that animal. And this all speaks to food safety, which is a big part of the Livestock Production Assurance Program. The next part of LPA also speaks to food safety. This is all around what livestock eat or what they're exposed to as part of, you know, natural habits. So this is around chemical use on pasture. So you might be treating for weeds or things like that. Or you might be buying in feed and feeding them supplemented foods or supplements as well. So it's important to know if those incoming products that you might be buying have been treated with chemicals, and understanding those withholding periods and when you might need to not feed them and feed them, and record that if you actually have fed something in a withholding period on that National Vendor Declaration when you sell those livestock. The other thing is around that chemical use, so making sure that you have good records when you are spraying on your property to make sure that you know when you can graze those livestock in those areas you've treated. So things like recording the batch number, the location, the withholding period, having a good chemical inventory if you do store chemicals on your property, and keeping those chemicals away from areas that livestock can actually access so they're not going to get accidentally contaminated. Around incoming feed, it's really important to understand if it has been treated with a chemical. So sometimes that does happen to prevent it from going bad, for example. So getting a commodity vendor declaration can also be important there to make sure that the livestock aren't fed something that's in a withholding period for that treatment, or if they are, that you observe that withholding period before you then go and sell those livestock on. So keeping in vein with the food safety, we also lend ourselves into now the food safety and animal welfare requirements. So this element within LPA is around the preparation for dispatch. So this is where we're getting livestock ready to transport. This is really important because we don't want stressed, injured, or you know, animals that aren't fit for the intended journey to get onto transport vehicles. So it's really important from an animal welfare perspective and also from a food safety perspective that we're not sending animals that won't make the journey. Records around this one is completing NVDs properly, doing your checks in your yards, and having good chats with your drivers as well if you can, to make sure that animals are fit to load and they're actually meeting that fit to load guide with that MLA provides. So it's really important because people will see animals on trucks, and that's where we'll actually get that community engagement around welfare. So it protects yourself if you know you're doing the right thing in this regard. It's also important to note curfew times as well, especially if you're selling direct to processing. Probably maybe not so important in the Northern Territory, but it's always important to understand time off feed and water requirements as well, because it feeds into welfare. So the next requirement within LPA is biosecurity. So this one's really important. I think given the northern part of the country's the closest to Indonesia at this point in time, and foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease was very, very prevalent, and it was, you know, a big media event, and it is in Indonesia, so it's important to keep vigilant. Biosecurity is part of your intrinsic LPA requirements. So within LPA, it's important that you have a documented biosecurity plan that looks at your risks of diseases, pests and weeds coming onto your property and then getting established. It is important to understand that it's what's reasonable and practical for your operation. So you can't control the birds flying overhead, but you can do things that prevent people, equipment and incoming livestock from potentially bringing things that you don't want onto your property. It's important to have this plan documented and shared with your staff and visitors so that they have an understanding of your requirements. It's practical things like keeping up fences where you can. I'll say that, where you can. Gates closed, signs up, contact details for your vet, your animal health officer, your state department, and emergency animal health disease hotline as well. Knowing the signs and symptoms of the diseases is also really important. So finding information from your government or Animal Health Australia is really important to check for, you know, what foot and mouth disease might look like or what lumpy skin might look like symptomatically, so you can actually monitor your livestock and make sure that you're checking them regularly if you do suspect an issue. Other things you can do around biosecurity is, you know, talking to your government biosecurity officers as well, because they'll be able to help you with planning if you're not sure, and making sure that you're keeping logs of visitors that come onto your property, and if you are buying in lots of livestock or consolidating lots of them, making sure that you have good quarantine practices, so you're allowing time to watch them to see if they do have diseases, and if you do let them go, that they've had a sufficient amount of time in yards to empty out and of things of that nature as well, so you're not spreading weeds and things you don't necessarily want elsewhere on your property. It's important to also sign up for alerts with your, the Northern Territory Government or animal disease hotline type of information as well, so that you can get alerted to information that might be coming across around biosecurity issues in your area. So the next requirement in LPA is around animal welfare. This one's important as it talks to the nationally agreed standards and guidelines for animal welfare. There's species specific in Australia, so we've got cattle, sheep and goats that all have their own sort of requirements to talk about responsibilities, feed and water, drought prevention, husbandry practices and so on. So it's really important under LPA that you can demonstrate that your animal care is in accordance with these standards. So within LPA, how you meet these requirements is around having access to these standards and guidelines so that you can read them and understand them. Also, you can complete animal welfare training in these standards. So that's part of your LPA accreditation process that you can do every 3 years, or if you like, you can do it at any time through LPA account. And also making sure that if you have staff on your property or in your business that are doing animal husbandry procedures, that they're also trained in these standards and guidelines relevant to their role. So there's types of things that you need to be considering as part of your LPA accreditation and compliance requirements for that. And the last section within LPA we'll talk about, which links in nicely with your NLIS requirements, is around livestock transactions and movements. So this is where it takes all those records that you've created as part of your business. So you've identified maybe contaminated livestock from your property risk assessment or treated animals in a withholding period, and you need to move them on or you're selling them. And it's all around completing that NVD to the best of your knowledge and with the records that you have around those animals. So NVDs are required if you're LPA accredited to move livestock from one property to another. So when you're moving livestock off your property, you need to fill out an NVD about those livestock. If you are buying in livestock, you need to get a copy of that LPA NVD as well. Other requirements that get brought into LPA is also around identifying your livestock with an NLIS accredited device. So for cattle, that's an eID, and making sure that you record movements of livestock onto your property in the NLIS database. So they're just the basic requirements around livestock transactions and movements that you're expected to meet as part of your LPA accreditation. The one thing we'll talk about here just momentarily is the paper NVD. So this one is a legal declaration. It's required if you're LPA accredited. You do need an NT waybill if you're in the Northern Territory as well to make sure that you have both of those, because you do need both. LPA NVDs I'll talk about and let Renae talk about the NT waybill in just a moment. But invalid NVDs are a problem, and they're a problem because if you're sending, say, cattle to export or to a processor, basically to anyone, that NVD is all the information they need to know to make decisions about where to send those animals or what market they can access. So if the questions aren't completed properly, it can't be read, it's not signed, the details aren't correct, it makes it invalid, and that makes it the integrity of the whole thing fall over. So it's really important that those paper NVDs are filled out really completely and properly. The other thing you can do is also complete electronic NVDs, which mean that the questions you are answering are actually mandatory. So it actually removes a lot of this issue with the invalid NVDs. And the beauty of the electronic is that they're actually free versus you don't actually have to buy the books with the NVDs. But I'll pause there and hand back to Cherie just for a little bit, who's going to talk to you about the benefits of the eNVDs and our new eNVD mobile app. So Cherie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So why is transitioning to digital consignments so important? I guess this is a really, good time to bring this in, because there are obviously issues with paper forms, and that is something that we're really trying to get on top of. So I'll just start with the challenges of paper. So basically, there's lots of issues around paper. The NVD form itself can change over time, and with a paper-based form, this can take a long time to travel through. So it can often mean that you might accidentally fill in an out-of-date paper NVD. There's also issues just around the paper forms themselves being lost, damaged, or misfiled away. They can also be really hard to read, like as you can see from this slide here. So there's, basically lots of areas where things can go wrong. Information can be filled in correctly, as Elizabeth just mentioned, and which does, create problems and inefficiencies through the supply chain. So moving this to a digital-based system is something we see as being beneficial for, for ensuring the robustness and the integrity of the system of our livestock industry. So it's quite an important move. So basically, to help with this, we created the eNVD system in 2018. And it brought many benefits. It's a system for LPA accredited producers, as Elizabeth just mentioned, to use as a livestock consignment system. So it's they're much easier to read, the eNVDs. They don't get lost. They're always available. They also help reduce duplication in form filling out. So the information can just be retained. So you don't have to keep repeating yourself, which just becomes more efficient. And it's just so much better to have this information captured digitally. It also makes it easier when it comes around to LPA audit time, because you've got all your paperwork there ready to go for the auditor to have a look at. But like with many things, the key challenge here was that there was not often internet where you needed it most. And that created a problem for the adoption of digital consignments with just the web system. So with that in mind, Integrity Systems Company went away and created a mobile app called the eNVD Livestock Consignments app. Now, it was released in March this year, and it has an offline functionality to it. So you need to be in an internet area to download it, but you can create consignments in it and transmit that information digitally using this QR code system if you're in a location that doesn't have internet. So it has got a lot of benefits to sort of overcome that connectivity challenge that was really a big problem for the eNVD system. So far, we launched it in March this year. We've had it downloaded over 15,000 times, and every month usage of it is growing across the country, which is great news. It works with the eNVD digital web-based platform, so you can start a consignment on your laptop or your desk computer and then finish it at the yards. So they work together quite well. It has a templates function built in. So if you have a consignment that you regularly send, you can repeat it and just save that as a template. So you don't have to keep repeating yourself and filling in the same information. So it's a lot of work to change. It's a big change, and we recognize that. So our adoption team has been out for the last 18 months working across different parts of the supply chain to try and get everyone to go digital. So we're talking the processors, the transport sector, the agents, sale yards. There's a whole, a lot of work that's been going on. So we recognise that it is a big change and that work will continue. The key takeout is, I guess, is just to check in. If you're wanting to use it, which is great, but before you do, just check in with your receiver. So that's your transporter or wherever you're sending your stock to, just to make sure that they're ready and able to receive a consignment in this way. Because if they're not, you can still print it out from the app. There's still a function, or you can share it as a PDF. There's a function built within the app to do that. So you can still do that. You might think, what's the point? But there is a benefit in having that information digitally captured for the rest of the supply chain to tap into. So there is merit in it. There is also still, it's important to remember the two-step process with the NLIS, which Elizabeth will go back onto. But yeah, so that's basically the app and the web system, and there's a lot of help out there. Our website, this site you have now, has a lot of information on there to help you use the app. Our customer service team are really happy to help as well with navigating the app. So we encourage you to get in touch, check out the website. There'll be, after this webinar is over, there'll be an email coming out to you all with a recording of this webinar, and also links to all the resources that we're talking about. So you'll be able to have a look at that as well. So keep your eye out for that. But yeah, now before I pass back to Elizabeth, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in that Q&A box, and our team can answer them for you. So yeah, with that, I shall pass you back to Elizabeth. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Lovely, thank you, Cherie. So now I'm going to talk to you about the National Livestock Identification System, also known as the NLIS. So as I mentioned just before, the LPA requirements do require also adherence to the NLIS requirements. So that is that you have a PIC, which you need to be able to get LPA accredited in the first place, and that also that you identify livestock with an NLIS approved device, and that livestock movements are recorded in the NLIS database. So they're the three kind of foundations of traceability, of tracing anything actually, and we do that through the database, which ISC administers. So NLIS is a legislative requirement. So in every state and territory in Australia, there's legislation that says you must have a PIC, and you must identify livestock, and you must record their movements in the database. So that's how it all fits together. And so if you're not LPA accredited, that's okay, but you have to do your NLIS requirements regardless of your LPA accreditation. So I just wanted to draw that line there for you. So I'm going to explore now just the basics of traceability. So the first is around having a property identification code, and this is the foundation for both LPA and NLIS, is that we need to identify the locations that livestock might be at. So you get your PIC from your state or territory government. So if you're from Northern Territory, the Northern Territory government will issue you a PIC, and that identifies your location in the NLIS database, so we can know that livestock move on or off your property. It's important to keep your details up to date as well with that one, so make sure that if you do move or change contact details, that you let your state department and ISC know, so we can update our records as well with that one. The second part or pillar of traceability in the livestock space is around identifying our livestock or animal identification. So some key pointers and reminders here. So ISC actually approve the devices. We run field trials and approve their suitability for use on animals, and accredited devices will have an NLIS logo printed on them. At the moment, there's two types. So there's electronic, which have a microchip in them, and you can scan them. And then there's also visual only tags as well that don't have a microchip and you can't be scanned. But that's usually used in sheep and goats in states and territories that don't use eID. For sheep and goats, that is. So the requirements around animal identification is it's one NLIS device per animal, especially if it's an eID. And for cattle, it needs to go in its right ear, and sheep and goats, it can go in either ear. You need to follow the application instructions for the device that you order and buy really carefully, because that will help with retention. If you use the wrong applicator, or the applicator's not in good condition, say the pin's broken or bent, you can actually get a poor retention rate because the device doesn't close properly. So it's really important to follow those instructions as well. I won't really dwell on sheep and goat eID for the Northern Territory too much here, but the colours for tags important for cattle. So white tags are important because that means that animal was born on the property. So cattle, we call them breeder tags, means that animal was born on that property and it's been given a white tag to show that that's the property it was born on. And orange tags for cattle indicate that it was not born on that property, and it might be a replacement tag for one that's fallen out, for example. So just some key reminders there around animal identification requirements in NLIS. Just a 101 here around the difference between visual and electronic. So cattle being all electronic, the electronic tags contain a microchip, as I just mentioned. So that's actually what are called a radio frequency identification device, which is actually a 16-digit character. You can see that on screen there, which is that top number, which is a unique number that when you order those devices from your device supplier, they'll actually create that code, which is unique, and they'll create and associate or link together a visual number as well, which is that second number underneath it, which gets printed on the outside of the tag. So that one's called the NLIS ID, and it will contain the pick that tag gets issued to. So if I ordered tags, it would have my pick in those first 8 characters on that visual number. It also contains a letter that represents the manufacturer, so we know who made the tag, whether the device was a breeder tag or a post-breeder tag, so whether it was born on that property or it was a replacement tag, also the year it was made, and a serial number there to keep it unique. So that we can read the outside of the tag to know sort of where it came from and look it up on the database if we need to. And also those two numbers get linked together, and the manufacturer that you order the tags from will actually upload those to the database to your pick, and that's sort of how they get onto your pick in the database. And so when you apply those tags to the animals and sell them off, the person buying your animals will scan them all with a reader and then basically tell the database, this is the list of tags or animals that I have, and move them from your pick onto their pick. So that's the third part of the NLIS database, which is around the recording of those movements. So it is a legal requirement, again, to do those movements, as well as an LPA requirement that we do check and audit against. So to do this, you need an NLIS account. If you do use a third party, like an agent or someone else of that nature, they can do it for you, but you really need to check that it's been done. So how to do that is to get an account. It is free to do, and just check that those movements have been recorded. So we have loads of how-to guides on how to check transfers onto your pick and off your pick to make sure that you're comfortable that those movements have actually been recorded. If you are using an agent, you can request something called an upload ID, which will actually show you, or you can search that number and actually check that movement matches what you've actually sold. If you're selling via a sale yard or to a feedlot or a processor, they'll actually do that movement because you're selling to them and they're the receiver, so they're responsible for doing that movement. And yeah, it's just important to do your checks. So making sure that you've got enough tags, and the tags that you do have on your pick match what you've either got on animals or spare in the cupboard as well. So you can do things like reconciliations on your account if you have one. And there's, again, loads of how-to guides and videos on how to do those records as well. The other thing here is when you do record a movement onto your pick, you can actually record the NVD serial number on that movement as well, which links together that LPA movement document and the NLIS transfer. And the benefit of eNVD is it sort of automatically can do that background linking as well. So it's important that, you know, the digital will help with that traceability and uplifting and linking things together in the end. But that's sort of the basics around NLIS. So I will pause there and hand over to Renae, who's going to run you through just some government updates around the Northern Territory requirements. So Renae, over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Cherie, as well. And thanks to Integrity Systems Company for putting this together and organising. So I guess just a couple of updates for the NT in terms of legislative changes is that the proposed changes will hopefully be in by 2025, which include sheep and goat eID, which I'll discuss a little bit further on, and having the NVD as an accepted movement document, which will hopefully avoid some confusion that comes with that. So in the NT, it's a requirement that all movements of cattle, buffalo, sheep, goats, camelids, deers and pigs that originate in the NT are required to be accompanied by an NT waybill. There is sometimes confusion around whether you need an NVD or an NT waybill or both. And you certainly need an NT waybill for any movement because it's a legislative requirement, and then it's a requirement of your LPA to have an NVD. NT waybills are only available in paper copy currently. The book consists of triplicate copies. The white copy is required to travel with the livestock. The pink copy is sent to your regional livestock biosecurity officer within 28 days from the movement date, and the green copy remains in the book. And then there's also the NT health certificates and waybills. So they're species-specific documents for any movements originating from interstate and entering the NT. So as you can see, when I remember to move the slide over, therefore cattle and buffalo, deers, camels, alpacas and llamas, goats, horses and sheep. If you are importing sheep, it's important to note that you're required to have Chief Inspector approval to import sheep into the Northern Territory. If you're considering importing sheep, please reach out to your regional livestock biosecurity officer just to make sure you've got all the correct information, and we'll include a list of contacts in the information provided by ISC after this webinar. So following on with sheep and legislation changes, as mentioned, it's intended for the NVD to become an accepted movement document, and then in relation to sheep and goat eID, the legislation will change from the current requirement of transaction tags to electronic devices, and in preparation for this, a subsidy for the eID tags is currently being developed. We'll be providing further information in July, which will also include information at your regional shows, so Darwin, Catherine, Tennant Creek and Alice Springs shows. And so we'll encourage early tagging through the subsidised program. It'll also be a requirement that you have a PIC, which if you have an LPA account, you would already have. It's an Australian-wide legislative amendment, and other states have already commenced tagging timelines for sheep and goats. That's about all in that space from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Renae. And thanks, Elizabeth, for your presentation as well. I think that might almost wrap us up for tonight. There's a survey that we've just put in the box there for you to fill in. It'd be great if you could fill it in. We'd love to get your feedback. There's some links to information for what you've heard tonight. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out an email with this recording plus any other helpful resources that we've discussed tonight over the different programs, so you can refer to those as well. Customer service is 1800 683 111, and they're available to answer your questions and help you through any issues that you might be having. Yes, so basically I'd just like to thank everyone for their involvement tonight, and thank you to all of you for attending. It's been great having Renae and Elizabeth present, and thank you to Callum and Tanya in the background answering questions, and Bridget for organising all of the slides. Yeah, just a last minute disclaimer here that if this is all, we can't do all this for you, but we're really here to help, and we understand that it is a lot of information, so that's why we're providing resources and support to help you. So please reach out if you need anything at all. Happy to help. And yeah, look, thanks very much for coming, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.